hello, Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN. In life, observation of all the ways people pretend what is binary is not. And while exploiting exceptions made, for example, for people to do business, where and how those exceptions are pretended not through criminal foreign influences, pretended not relevant, no, to the correlation nature, each age of correlation nature, offensively prevented understanding of what our schools are and increasing our and valuing having been used instead as traps, used instead as types of experts and tools. Well, this is a tool we use, individually grouped in together. From off campuses before that, there was one method and /S as one identity of sophistication per science, no theory. See, people are pretending others are making theories. Also, like for example, the first part of the Quran and the first part of the Old Testament written in English. I've never read it written in Latin. But there were needs, and there is increasing value for where and how the Old Testament written in Latin, and where and how the Old Testament written in English are locked into place the way they are, were/are. Note, relative, not just to all the other New Testament, this type, that, and what, a whole bunch of time distinctions. Quality of fact, cheap in nature, identity distinctions, no. Locations distinctions. Increasingly value is what the most important part. It says right up front, before not even the complete beginning of the Quran and of the Old Testament. The Old Testament says explicitly, the Old Testament says, all you have to do is understand right up to here. And the people of the sciences will come together. The sciences share an identity of simultaneous nature. That we are simultaneously supposed to use a scientific value /S to discern not discern, but be trying to discern more and more, using the difference between what we know and don't know. No, not using theory. There are a lot of things that this method is all locations. Then, and increasingly, what is actually recorded, it is further simultaneously off database relationships, private ones, and where there are schools, simultaneously further per a method that knew, and no, those are sciences. Those are identities of relationship individually grouped and together. To the identity the sciences share, the identity of simultaneous nature. That is distinctly, non-distinctly, and is simultaneously itself, as the value of why we and how we are revealed individuals, group and together, species, identity of volume. This is the way it wants us to be conscious. Only the extent of it is debatable, but offensively the sciences, therefore the sciences names, members, individually grouped and together. Therefore those locations know. increasingly positive and negative treatments. No, positive and negative has identity, a relationship to identity itself. As this volume science, where positive and negative have a relationship to identity itself. I mean, identity has a relationship to positive and negative simultaneously, as a quality of diffusion. Quality relevant to where and how one identity of positive that will only stay positive to itself here distinctly, as Earth's distinct, non-distinct, and simultaneous relationship to the rest of space nature / existence, and the slash being that quality of diffusion as all that together. We are one part of this. Everyone is an individual. To discern how the value of it, where and how we are, value as a quality of diffusion, half discernible, half not. Because this identity of simultaneous nature demonstrates how it is making more of the identity of volume / S, that all difference / S, as space / existence since before matter was generated. The equivalent of three identities of zero were and are only increasing value. Now where that becomes, how that becomes, and actually is relevant to where we are, this quality of fusion, in other words, now through matter, now through identity, through body of value. So it is more probable that the ancients, earlier than we are told to perceive, in other words, all differentially too. It's not just that people weren't allowed to read, since before our founding parents were even born, by a breaching method, one, singular. And that method / S, while it had roles / has recorded, that's what's actually recorded. We need quality of time treatments. Even where people are going to walk is used to hide the live progressions, because there is a complete remote possession of the locations, areas, and states. Databases tied stewards, including the three branches of government, and all services and private tied to them, considered exception nature. And that's what they are. Exception / exception nature. That's what they are manifest with and as the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the political branch. I didn't read this. It is recorded evidence how they self-value, and how that is used remotely by themselves self-valuing, individually grouped together. For example, words and identities of theater, such as, quote, criminal insidiousness, unquote, which I believe is in Black's Law Dictionary and or legal dictionaries. Now this is also defined distinctly by people associated with war lawyers. Lawyers associated with war, preempting wars, preempting threats per the identities of uses of the sciences originally and still abridged, criminally foreign influenced, and identity one of the things used by the interbranch, pretending they weren't, which they recorded are, everyone, victim predators of sickly, criminally foreign influenced sciences treatments, fact treatment nature. This method, new method singular, the breaching method that was here before the Constitution in its abridged state / S. It's a mistake to entertain with that which is not simultaneous. That which is simultaneous, which is the breaching method. For example, when using the phrase, a more perfect union, the law, the Constitution unabridged. I'm not a lawyer, not a police firm, not a criminal, not a doctor, not a judge. They're each even relying on each other's integrity and names and locations involved with offensive evidence perception racketeering. Countries A1 through Z, however many are there, were in a semi-ancient trap that built everyone. Forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, taken as all is worse, only made capable of blaming other things, others, and or blaming selves for the real causes of negative value, nature, progressions, acts, and nature, and uses of them. And while sequence shifts are increasingly valued, relevant to remote uses of our youngest kids on and off campuses, recorded also hiding behind the arrays of excellent children stewards to the worst and the people who need to respond. This is all a part of remote uses. So in other words, people like police and judges and politicians and teachers, their sense and sensibilities, they're being forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded to pretend them. And using defenses of premises treatments of other people's names. Also has simultaneous uses of the interbranch that are the ones with themselves. And with all kind of big world, small world conversations being and having been employed. For example, distinct, non-distinct, and simultaneously complete remote possession of both political parties, shock and awe, where and how they're using to measure our own. But worse than this is measuring that, telling them doing this. But in other words, everyone entertaining them, using phrases like what the heck was I going to say? This is how many long? 54 minutes. This is good enough. But using phrases like all of them, using all the words the way they use them. Because they've been using evidence perception by the interbranch that since they were kids, they were involved with programs in other police forms that is relevant to where how they legitimately are hiding things. They are simultaneously, increasingly, originally, and still illegitimately doing so. They never had separation from collusion /S per remote uses of all identity ground locations, points of difference, like corners, everywhere sickly distinctly too, specifically to maintain screened, the breaching method, undiscerned by everyone, individually grouped in together, all identities of sophistication, how remotely such is used. For example, this deals with needing to use as evidence what is actually recorded outside of courts, that are also courts and police forms A1 through Z, however many there are. They've been fabricating audio and video into databases. They've been totally making things up and doing that to replace that which is actually recorded. They've been simultaneously taking and keeping the news media and people involved on and off the locations with them, where and how in the background investigations and investigators are consciously perceiving things wrong, pretending to perceive things wrong, sequence shifting, hiding what they did before they were involved with the investigations, as ones involved with so many other countries and uses of the cultural also. And so these are news media. In other words, they even have like famous people and athletes and actresses, singers. They have them and their family members as victims when they're reacting, and then they're reporting on such. They're leaving out what's actually recorded, which is remote uses of how they send people to places where other people are too. And those people that are there were kept needing to hide live aggressions as roles with the location's worst things. Box things, the places involved with mental evaluations. These are real quick time treatments where they're also simultaneously fabricating audio and video. Also with people formerly on off campuses, private and public stacking and speaking illusions, roles of wire crime acts and methods, remote uses of all identities of sophistication, like the FBI, former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin. His co-defendants in a part of a 2006 case that was ongoing at the time of my father's death. They were all recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, since I was a kid, involved in backgrounds with identity thefts and frauds instances and slanders and sequence shifts and people that set up exceptions between kids. But in other words, there are people that live around me that I never had a conversation with at all. People that live around me. They had cousins and friends in my grade, and associated with the people in my grades growing up, from 4th grade on, that were being used to attach me to fake locations. There were no exceptions, and there was ones where they were had quick exceptions, and they're lying about the behavior of other people. And they're using that theater over where their own people do the sickest, crazy things around other kids. Or say the sickest, crazy thing. Because we have offensive evidence reception, racketeering, worse than war crimes, but simple method. We have offensive identity thefts / fraud, distinct from that, worse than war crimes. We have offensive. So at hospitals involved with military and public corruption. This is originally and still recorded clear as day how the lawyers were self-valued roles, needs, natures, for all locations, areas, states, and in other words, there are things that the breaching method made legal that you can't legalize without nature itself demonstrating you as a criminal insidiousness nature, as a wrongdoer increasingly, as involvements with wrongdoing, as a styles of premises treatments increasingly self-valued, criminally foreign influence to get away with it, blaming the real causes of collusion in positive treatments and of negative treatments to the same conviction /S, increasingly not native pure. Increasingly the Native Americans, they feel that difference, and in other words, not just feel, they're communicated that difference. Because our own are measured by and through other countries that themselves, they're measured there, through other countries, and ourselves. They all admit they're fake sciences. Simultaneously, they have nuclear weapons. They want to glorify because they have impressions. They have convictions, in other words. Increasingly is value. The nature of what is said at the beginning of the Quran and at the beginning of the Old Testament. And there are proofs that this is to preserve the means to be led again by what English was revealed to teach in ancient times before sciences became criminally foreign influenced, regardless of who is to blame for it. They could no longer defend themselves as positive negative treatments, as identities and titles, what that means treatments. There are people offensively with passions, emotions, pretending, oh, that's disrespectful to people that died in wars. For example, here and there, if in other words, their logic is in collusion with that which is at the executive branch, and as the executive branch in the equivalent in other countries, and the judicial branch and the equivalent in other countries were individually grouped and together. That with the political branch too. They are kept needing to hide the same sequence shifts, finite, active, and progressive lies, with overt criminal enterprises and private ones. To discern this, we have to discern the identity of relativity. That such is, in other words, such claims by the legitimacy of interpretations by the back parts of the Quran and of the Old Testament that leave out the increasing value of that first sequence shift. That says even in a mosque, anyone's not supposed to pray if there's something off. And people don't even know how to pray because everyone was separated from the ancient revelations that came from before. Sciences became criminally foreign influence before even modern religion's messengers were born. Thank God for them. Distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, everyone was hurt. So say thank God for them distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, but as a science. That means led by the identity of simultaneous nature. We know that is true always. Individual is an identity of volume that is grouped, and that is species identity of volume / as simultaneously. We are a quality of diffusion. We're more and more forever nature that it will only stay positive unto itself. While as itself, as a quality of diffusion here, as Earth's distinct and non-distinct and simultaneous identity of relation to itself, as space nature / existence, has further two identities of sequence / simultaneous nature, as exception nature, and demonstration of how it is 1 / 3 / 5, where the identity of volume that 1 is can't be 3. But like for example, the identity of a cell is one name, but it also has the identity of the cell nucleus, the cell body, and the cell wall /S. Note the cell walls are connected. So the body of value is being discerned. Being demonstrated. It's shown how manifest and further positive or negative. So a criminal insidiousness nature, for example, like a wrongdoer, when they're pretending other and hiding things and putting illusions in for their own motivations. With American history, that was relevant to database relationships, laws that were about what people could say, that were criminally foreign influenced. They were involved with a breaching method and maintenance method that was already and is already here. So when they make treatments of the insurrection, for example, they're using that to measure and maintain for themselves. Which that and the whole nature as criminal insidious nature is criminally legalized self-value. That was already used remotely too. All identity ground locations are. And they are recorded roles with these methods that are keep. So you have to follow it how it's been connected intercampuses, including private and public. This has nothing to do with any of their identity treatments, their cultural treatments. They have theories. In other words, American history is about how not one election James Marbury versus Madison is not free yet. George Washington said he could tell no lies. That means, in other words, there are proofs, even if it's not true. It describes, even if he didn't know about it. CT, Connecticut. This is where George Washington had to come to secure the help of the French general. How could we win a revolutionary war? We're not even a country. All the states, interstates, already had roles, north and south, with things like slavery. Crazy, crazy laws onto each person. Everyone's making positive and negative treatments. No, as fact treatment nature, as identities, titles. Subjects treatments, no. Anyway, leaving out the simultaneous. So increasingly, the people who understand about computers, how simple it is, relative to the circuit, as a value/value progression. I didn't read that. I mean, and then on to locations/memory/IAS. And the types of memory, but they increasingly need to lie about actual memory. Actual means by correlation/discorrelation, which are means simultaneously more finite and greater than that. There is something greater than what is our species identity of volume revealed by it. The identity of simultaneous nature. I'm not giving a name. And Jesus Christ wasn't asking for his name to be used the way it is. Demonstrably. Increasingly too. And the name of Muhammad and as Rasulullah. That's, in other words, people aren't valuing the first part of the sequence of the Quran. They're not valuing the nature of the law, which is so critical, like the fifth pillar of Islam. Charity. But see, there are criminal insidiousness natures of charity, of positive treatments and collusion originally and still. And that was made self-valued. Because everyone was made self-valued roles with all locations, areas, and states of modern nations blaming and having blamed on other things, others themselves, and or on selves. The real causes of nature demonstrating negative identity of value, nature, progressions, acts, and natures, finite, active, and progressive, and sequence shifts, illusion, self-value, emotions and passions, led by misinformation. Here, in other words, modern nations can't defend their fact treatments and their opinions and as theories offensively. So they're exploiting where and how they are science on paper for fact treatment nature racketeering tricks. As victims directed to do so by why and how we have to address how the remotely, overtly, originally and still, the branches of government individually grouped and together, and the exception nature with them, are kept needing to hide the same sequence shifts, finite, active, progressive lies, illusions, as illusions commonly. I mean, and identity theft/frauds, method, roles, that breaching method, that used those crazy laws. If you met to speak about building infrastructure that was born, that was forced in the scale of it, and whether you could say, if you were found speaking about that outside of crazy meetings where we had these countries, A1 through Z, however many were there here and there, North and South, rolled with slavery simultaneously. If you say anything against slavery, it's not like, okay, you're against slavery, go to the court. No. See witch trials. Who's going to go to the court? No one. Every identity, the ground location, was engineered. Increasingly, time treatments, all that, victims only capable of blaming other things, others themselves, and ourselves for the real cause of negative item. And this is a method, too, designed the whole time to make anyone who tries to use correlation/discorrelations actually inherent active progressive means. Again, with two identities of sequence/simultaneous nature. Further with that. Excuse me. So, we could fund our own agency, for example, to go to fix the most forsaken locations. We make hyper-journalism. There is a need for it. There is nonverbal communications. There is verbal communications. And there is demonstrably a need for us to use discern hyper-communications. Now, for example, verbal communications, the person could be lying. But also originally and still, the people lying would be calling the others liars and getting away with it because, theories, defenses of them as styles of criminally foreign influence logic, delusions wrought, but also rules, crimes, predators, roles. A breaching method from semi-ancient times propagated the locations, areas, and states of the sciences distinctly from other database relationships, and further kept needing to hide the same sequence shifts, finite active progressive lies, identity thefts and frauds, instances, roles, and methods, plural roles. Now, there is a method that is our subject, the breaching method, singular. But this operated everybody remotely. Now, it hurt everyone sickly distinctly to make binary treatments. In other words, at the end of the whip, against our founders too, even though they weren't physically whipped. There were people telling people to make positive and negative. They weren't just doing this for punishment because of crimes or to teach people lessons and things like this. This was associated with the theater of positive and negative treatments that were in collusion as criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments, of sequence treatments, of names treatments, of title treatments, of simultaneous, of that which is actually simultaneous, which requires an additional nature and method of prayer that is per science, has nothing to do with like pray. In other words, this is how to pray. For example, what is the progressive value of the design of New York City, which is a progression tied to the foundation of that, again, since before our founding parents were born, with slavery, not only North and South, but sickly distinctly, effectively to keep into having kept, blamed on other things, others themselves. The real method behind it because it was also a method doing it to others like England and like the other countries involved with slavery, including Africa, the African countries, including, they made rolls with a minority fraction of each country, where and how they maintain complete remote possession of all identities of sophistication, increasingly valuing the real causes of all the negative value nature progressions, acts and natures, acts like predicate acts, natures like criminal insidious natures, wrongdoers, wrongdoing itself, blamed on other things other than self and or on selves, and defenses of that as logic defenses, uses of premise treatments, time treatments, quality of fact treatment, nature, uses of a database and what they call research, use of the word research itself to play time tricks with the lawyers originally and still. 2. Criminally foreign influence readings of statutes, delusions wrought, but simultaneously rules, crimes, predators, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously with the other branches of government and the foreign, simultaneously needed to hide lies by collusion with uses of Facebook pages, stewards, methods like pretending to be upset about what people posted after way worse is recorded. In other words, there are no means to, we're not allowed to record the police and or the other interbranch and all this private and people tied to body dumping spots and to uses of that and of the families next to the spots and the recorded spots and confessed and confirmed on Facebook, real or made up. Also recorded, confessed, and demonstrated to me and others involved with a whole bunch of people with the locations next to the state of Connecticut judicial branch offices and the locations next to it. Kept needing to hide lie progression, roles with uses of corners and of wire crimes, falsified police reports, identity thefts and fraud, sequence shifts, uses of the value, such value progression, which is also relevant to why I say on off the state of Connecticut judicial branch offices. And that should be scary for people to say if they're lying. And it should not, but it's got to be, they're making it scary anyway because of their collusion, not legitimately, where they are legitimately collusion with all these countries and with overt criminal enterprises, plural. But they also have uses and roles with, they're predicate acts methods. Predicate acts delivery system methods roles were had interbranch. That's what's said by what Jim Crow laws are about. All victim reactions, fact nature wise, defenses of them, relevant to what was said. In other words, styles that are increasingly then and now needed to self-value. The words in theater are forced, entertained by our, and said, and pretended said only as capacities they had to pretend originally. In other words, if they showed their real roles with what forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, counter-persuaded, counter-extorted our founders to take part with the Constitutional Convention. In other words, the Constitution must be unabridged. See, we have people that want to debate this, using increasingly too, self-valuing, all time treatments, all theater, all people pretending their emotions are hurt. Same people, other contacts trying to hurt other people's emotions, so they can lie about them. So they can hide their roles with identity theft / fraud. So, in other words, there are instances where they make exceptions where people know each other. And for example, this is demonstrative not just against each person sickly distinctly. People go to have parties and with things with their friends growing up and stuff like that. That's fine. So, but then they make exceptions real fast, specifically to make exceptions. So, because they're calling people liars, where they have the liars going through these things, they have identity thefts and frauds roles. They have a certain kind of victim, predator, child abuse roles. That which is first roles at all locations that everyone missed, and consciously through other motivations, natures, needs, interests, his roles with instances, then self-defended. Positive and negative treatments, identity treatments, then self-defended, formally and spoken, and on off campuses, on off corners, on off. Also confessions at corners, where people are going to walk at each age. See, that's not what public education was supposed to be for. We have the people pretending passions and emotions. When they say they're pretending to be unsafe, those are people involved with abuse. In other words, we have the intelligence community as the ones playing these games, and they have a guy from Korea from a taekwondo place that Joe DeMoro said wanted to communicate with me years ago. I don't know him. I don't know his name. But that place is now where the people on off the Weathersfield Library, on off where the Weathersfield Police Department is now too, was a new spot, and on off the locations next to that in Hartford. Through time, people involved with identity theft, fraud, child abuses, elder abuses simultaneously. The only reason we're not being allowed to afford our leveraged means actually capable instantly for the elderly and for the children is because we have a whole bunch of people that are increasingly self-valued originally and still. Criminally foreign influence, database relationships, uses of them knowing where we're going to be, uses of their confessions used remotely. They know that kids in grammar school at the youngest ages could understand their confessions and demonstrations of roles differentially criminally foreign influenced. Increasingly, how could something be only increasing if it's differential? In other words, and the value of it. In other words, we are positive here, and there is a further positive. Their inventions work or not in relationship to this identity of simultaneous nature. They are further positive or not in relationship to it. So we need to discern the difference between hyper-positive, positive as criminal insidious nature, or we don't know. We think it's positive, but if it's not in nature, speaking for what's formal, and or expert, and or title, and or is interbranch function, individually grouped and together, those identities of the same body, individually grouped together too, used remotely. All identity ground locations are value/valuable question. Phenomenon will examine associated with the transition from the ACA, Organized Crime Control Act, to RICO, Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organization Act, with the former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and with various natures of courts, and on-office state judicial branch offices, in uses of systems and roles with that already, for example, and methods actually recorded that show that it is plausible and it is practical, even in many ways obligated, to discern if allegations made, and to not just if, but also how, even if the person's telling the truth, allegations made against Judge Napolitano with Fox News. They are involved with sequence shift because there's what is actually recorded how all their identities and jobs with the various natures of courts, including cases I had nothing to do with, and cases where they're forcing innocent people to because of the hierarchy into branch of the police forms. For example, involved with predicate acts and methods on and off Central Connecticut State University since I was a kid. That's in New Britain. The people that were from off that campus involved further through time, intercities, with people also uses the locations next to hide their live aggressions simultaneously. Even some of the patients and criminals who have doctors and who have judges that put them in prison and who have prison stewards, some of their patients and criminals, some of the worst ones too, and people associated with the locations involved with them, and like body dumping spots. They had timed roles with other instances, other roles with all the recorded offensive evidence perception racketeering. When I was in 6th grade, people said that there's a Lance Cuddy, and there are people on Park Street involved with a bar. That years later, Lance Cuddy and people on Park Street involved with a bar. They're recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved through time with a whole bunch of different countries. People on the state prison offices also. Involved also with people in my area I never saw in my area location. I mean, my location, near houses and streets near me in my life. Never saw him on a campus in my life. Lance Cuddy. Saw a picture of him. If there was one instance, that was it. I didn't think I knew there was. Someone brought his name up when I was in 6th grade. Now that same campus through time had more people I caught, recorded, and confessed and demonstrated by people involved with the child abuser registry since before they got caught. There are also ones involved with FBI and the CIA and their identities and titles and uses of them. Military families, a whole bunch of families from Central Connecticut State University. I never had a conversation with my life. All exceptions, exception nature with some of them, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with since they were kids. They were told lies about me and told to act on, off. Look, in other words, these are people I don't even see on campus. Never see them on campus. And they all have different ties to sense and sensibilities. Like, for example, because they abuse the boys and girls sickly, distinctly, non-distinctly, simultaneously, they keep them individually grouped and together, needed to sequence shift, self-value roles with offensive evidence perception, racketeering, identity thefts and frauds, schemes, slanders, uses of them roles, uses of the Department of Transportation, of Department of Motor Vehicles remotely, the post office, the places next to them, the places next to the schools. This is what is recorded. Then they pretend that you're saying them about their name because they're pretending that we had conversations with us since we're kids with complete strangers and with people that do have conversations with us, and then they replace what's actually recorded with fabricated audio and video. And they use such as roles to paint arrays of opinions that are furthering the same illusions tied to sequence shifts, identity thefts, and frauds instances, roles, uses of that roles that are also all other than all the uses of it and names involved at locations, the overt criminal enterprises, the private ones, and the programs where they have to, and they're acting teachers, you know, all their involvements. When the police say different things too, they say they want to communicate. They're like a trap because they pretend they communicate with you. I caught them offensively with people when they were kids. They were forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded with their families to go into the Weathersfield Police Department and pretend for them all kinds of things. Vaccines. And they kept telling the people to change it, one kid said. At least one kid said. And that was in an affidavit. See, but there were judges in various natures of courts and their family members also involved with these kids, with those other natures of communications about their roles with the uses of corners for identity thefts and frauds, where they also lie about the motivations and sequence relationships to others and their motivations for where they are when they're going to be there. And they also use such to keep girls where they're going to keep their mouth shut because they have multiple. So they have multiple abuses and uses of all the natures of abuses at each campus, each age. I never had anything. I basically never had a conversation with Ray Reynolds in my life that was verbal, except when I was in kindergarten one time. He's involved with men and women, with the intelligence community, with private tied to them, like medical, involved with medical racketeering, and with overt natures of things, with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and people associated with uses of body dumping spots, sensibilities towards things, where everyone's making opinions, and simultaneously telling other people that, in other words, WFSB and Fox Connecticut News, and WFSB and NBC Connecticut News, they have roles with all these different wire crime acts and methods, and different natures of wire crime acts and methods and roles in the same fake news stories. Then they pretend such is personal when you say it. Also, but that was after they were already involved with sequence shifts and roles with uses of parks and the campuses involved. See, regardless of the hierarchy that influenced them to such, also simultaneously Interbranch was forging and switching names and fabricating falsified police reports, switching names of officers even in the falsified police reports, even, in other words, ones that weren't even present, and from different departments, all kinds of tricks. So no one can go back and make sense. So they maintain the criminally foreign influence, quality of fact-achieving nature, roles, needs, and natures. Increasingly need to hide remote uses of that, because it was remote uses of each location, since before each location was sophistication, since before the oldest stewards that we need to rely on, and the youngest stewards we need to rely on. This is before they were even born. So boxing's tour. So they have collusion with the people that deal with people in hospitals, with all the ways that, multiple different ways, and all the ways that the religious people are dealing with people that die, and there are people who are forced for mental evaluation, which is something they do, which is also where recorded with being and having been done by people when they're caught at locations as roles with predicate acts, child abuses, identity thefts, and frauds, with overt criminal enterprises and private ones, not just with the Interbranch. They've been hiding live aggressions, roles with it, uses of campuses remotely. This is what you have. They're pretending people are telling conspiracy theories. They know the people who answer the phones for them. And though their delusions rot, but they're simultaneously rules, crimes, predator, method, roles. So they're preventing people from reporting actual acts and names properly. Our intelligence community, including the Interbranch, they're speaking fake things into records. Why should that be any different than it's always been? Boxing. They were kept meeting with the people.